in order to talk, I think, adequately about Rastafarian and the movement, we have to talk about the person that it is based upon, whose name is, some know him as Rastafari or Haile Selassie. I'll explain when he got each of those titles. But initially, he was born Tafari Makien Waldi Mikael. If you see it, that's his name up here. Tafari means one who is feared or one who is respected. This was his father's name, and this third name was his grandfather's name. Similar to how we have Ibn and Abu, they have their father's name and their grandfather's name in there to kind of show their heritage. It was also important for them to understand that he was of the Solomonic dynasty. So he said he traced his roots back to Solomon and Queen of Sheba. So it's very important to understand that heritage and why he was seen to be who he was later. He was born in Ethiopia on July 23rd, 1892. And he was always, I guess, suspected or ready to be the emperor. So in 1916 to 1930, he was the Ethiopian's regent, meaning he was preparing to become the emperor. In 1930, he actually became the emperor, and he was the emperor of Ethiopia until 1974. He was given the title at that time of King of Kings and the name Haile Selassie, which means, I have it here, the might of the Trinity. At that time, and even now, a lot of Ethiopians are Christians. So he was given the name the might of the Trinity, or the power of the Trinity. And he was also honored in Time magazine with this cover because he was the emperor of Ethiopia. I think 2 articles was written on him in 1930. Haile Selassie is also the person who initiated the concept of the United States of Africa. He twice served as the chairperson of the Organization of Africa Unity. And this emperor also was a person who brought Ethiopia into the League of Nations, and he also made them a member of the United Nations. So he gave Ethiopia a lot of prestige during his tenure. He would also introduce the first constitution was written under his rulership. On August 27th, 1942, he abolished the legalization of slavery throughout his empire, and he gave severe punishments, including death for slave trade. He is also well known for fighting fascism, that which was implemented or attempted to be implemented from Italy. There were 2 different wars between Italy and Abyssinia, or Ethiopia, as it was initially called Abyssinia in ancient times. And the first war they had already lost, and Mussolini wanted to vindicate the Italians, so he attempted to overthrow Ethiopia again and bring his brand of fascism and dictatorship to that land. And Haile Selassie not only was the emperor, but he was also a warrior. He actually fought in the wars. And one of the battles he was defeated in, and he was put into exile, I believe, for about 5 years. And while he was in exile, he went around secretly to gain support around the world. He even came to the Americas. He came to America, and he got into a cab and got into a car accident and hurt his leg, I believe, really badly. Even though he was in pain, he came to the radio station, and he tried to garner support amongst the Americans to help him fight against Italy. He used the consciousness of the United Nations as well as their belief in Christianity to say we all should be together to fight against this fascism. And when he returned from exile, with the help of several nations, including the United Kingdom, France, and Belgium, he defeated Italy. But shortly thereafter, there was a huge famine in Ethiopia, and it killed thousands of people. Some people blamed him for this famine, and revolution started. There were different rebellions that were started in Ethiopia, and there was what they call a coup d'etat, or overthrowing of the government. Haile Selassie ruled Ethiopia for 45 years before he was overthrown by a Marxist dictator named Mengistu Haile Mariam in 1974. Mengistu, though he was an Ethiopian, he was backed by the Soviet Union and this group called the Derg. The Derg was a shortened name for the Coordinating Committee of the Armed Forces, Police, and Territorial Army. Now, Mengistu and the Derg are estimated to kill up to 750,000 Ethiopians. Hundreds of thousands of university students, intellectuals, and politicians were killed during Mengistu's reign, many without trials. The Human Rights Watch described the Ethiopian Red Terror. They call it the Red Terror because the Soviet Union was called the Red Terror at that time because they went around trying to colonize the world just as Great Britain was. And this was happening in Ethiopia, so they called it the Ethiopian Red Terror. They said it was one of the most systematic uses of mass murder by a state ever witnessed in Africa. During Mengistu's reign, it was not uncommon to see students and suspects of the government who were critics to be hanging from lampposts early in the mornings. Selassie during that time was detained and he was imprisoned under house arrest. He was under house arrest for a little over a year before he died. And he died of what they said was respiratory failure due to complications after a prostate operation. But his doctor denied the claims and believed that he was assassinated. Mengistu was suspected of smothering the emperor, but he always denied that claim up until his death. Now, in my research, it said a Western correspondent had this to say about it. Now, a Western correspondent, to me, when I read it, it sounded like a spy or a CIA agent, somebody who was involved who didn't want to be known. But at any rate, this is what he said. He said, while it is not known what exactly happened, there are strong indications that no efforts were made to save him. It is unlikely that he was actually killed. Some rumors were bound to arise no matter what happened, given the atmosphere of suspicion and distrust prevailing in Ethiopia at the time. Now, the Derg, who were helping Mengistu overthrow Haile Selassie, they fell in 1991. In 1992, they found Haile Selassie's bones under a concrete slab on a palace ground. Some suggested that he was discovered underneath a latrine. That's the disrespect they showed to this man who brought them independence and brought them on the world stage. On November 5th, the year 2000, Haile Selassie was given an imperial-style funeral by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and he was buried in the Holy Trinity Cathedral. Now on to the Rastafarian movement. The Rastafarian movement began in Africa in the 1930s when Haile Selassie was given the title or made the emperor. They saw him as a king of kings. They also don't subscribe to the title Rastafarianism because they fight against isms, whether it's communism, fascism, or racism. So it's more of a Rastafarian movement, not necessarily Rastafarianism. Just ism seems to be something that some of them are averse to. Now, followers are estimated to be between 2 and 4 million, and they revere Haile Selassie as the second coming of Jesus and God incarnate. After his death, one Rastafarian said, Haile Selassie is the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and the conquering lion of the tribe of Judah. He is everything to us Rastafarians. We will not accept that he is dead. So the Rastafarian movement, they revered him as a messianic figure who would bring about the golden age of peace and tranquility and righteousness. Now it is viewed as, is everything right? It is viewed as a monotheistic religion and one of the Abrahamic religions, just because they, even though it's not a major religion, it's about 2 to 5 million people, it's still considered Abrahamic belief because they believe in Abraham and all of his lineage. And they actually believe in the Bible and Jesus and all the prophets of God. They call God Jah, short for Jehovah, and they believe in the Trinity. As you remember, Haile Selassie means the might of the Trinity. Now, Rastas say that Jah is the form of the Holy Spirit incarnate within human beings. So for this reason, they refer to themselves as I and I instead of we, and sometimes using I instead of me, because they see the equality in all people, and they say that the Holy Spirit is within all people, and essentially we are all one and the same. They also see Haile Selassie as fulfilling the prophecies in Genesis to the book of Revelation. In the book of Genesis, it reads, God made in his own image. God made man in his own image. So they view God as being a human being. In Psalm 2, it reads, yet I set my holy king on my holy hill of Zion. And Psalms 87:4 is interpreted as predicting the reign of Haile Selassie. During his coronation, he was given 38 titles and anointments taken from the Bible. He was called the King of Kings, the Elected of God, the Conquering Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Author of Mankind, the Power of the Authority, etc., etc. He was also acclaimed from various Christian and Muslim leaders and clergy for his works in establishing peace and brotherhood among mankind. For this was the primary reason that many believe that he was God incarnate. Rastafarians also refer to Haile Selassie as His Imperial Majesty, or HIM. If you see HIM after his name, they call him Jah, and Jah Rastafari, just amongst a few names. They see Haile Selassie as being worthy of worship and having stood with great dignity in front of the world's press and representatives in front of the most powerful nations, especially when he gave his appeal in front of the League of Nations. He was the only independent non-European monarch in Africa at that time. Now, Rastafarians, in their belief of good and evil, or we may think of heaven or hell, they talk about Babylon. And Babylon is the rejection of society's materialism, of their oppression, of their greed and sensual pleasures. Now, if you remember in the Bible, they talk about the Tower of Babel, and they see this as the rejections of God's rules. You know, in the Tower of Babel, they were trying to build a tower up to God, and God confused their language, and they were babbling amongst each other. So they see Babel as a place of corruption, sometimes called corrupt police, Babylon. And they see the Pope and Catholicism in Rome as Babylon. You remember Italy was fighting against Ethiopia and Haile Selassie. So they see Rome as well as a place of Babylon. Not to mention that Rome is the place that married paganism and Christianity. You know, Saturnalia, Easter, Christmas, all of those things came from Rome. So they see those things as a corruption of the true religion. It also proclaims Zion, and Zion is in reference to Ethiopia as the original birthplace of human beings. In the Bible, it says the Garden of Eden was in Cush, and Cush is Ethiopia. And from the beginning of it was the beginning of the way of life for human beings. So they ask for repatriation, is what I think I wrote down here. Repatriation is the promise to return back to this promised land of heaven on earth, be it Ethiopia or the entire continent of Africa, because it's sometimes referred to as the entire continent. And it is also referred to as a state of mind, not necessarily just a physical place. Many often see Marcus Garvey as John the Baptist, as the front runner to Haile Selassie. And he is attributed with a famous prophecy which said, "Look to Africa, for there will be a black king shall be crowned." So he was, in that sense, they believe he was talking about a ruler who would rule over not only Africa but over the world. I would suggest. Other things that we associate with Rastafarians is dreadlocks. Now, they see this as the natural way of growing hair. In the Bible, if you remember the story of Samson, he was a Nazarite, and he did not cut his hair. And his wife or girlfriend, Delilah, had his hair cut, and that's where he lost his powers. Now, not only did she cut his hair, the Bible says he cut 7 locks of his hair. His 7 locks, which means, especially amongst Rastafarians, see this as, obviously, they were talking about dreadlocks, not 3 strands of hair. Now they also, sometimes we also affiliate marijuana or cannabis with Rastafarians. They see this as a spiritual usage, and oftentimes it's called a reasoning, in which they smoke marijuana and they talk about and they read the Bible and they discuss God. Some of them say that they are reasoning with God. Now, the most popular Rastafarian, the most popular person who brought, I think, Rastafarian and that lifestyle and that belief to the forefront was Bob Marley. So we think of reggae music also when we think of Rastafarian and their beliefs. He was the most popular. He's probably what Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali was to the Nation of Islam. That's what he was to Rastafarianism, and that he brought it to the forefront. And he's world-renowned figure even to this day, 30, 40 years after his death. And one of his favorite, and one of his several songs that are most famous was, he says, or one of the lyrics reads, "Almighty God is a living man." It says, "We know and we understand Almighty God is a living man," speaking of Haile Selassie. Now, when Haile Selassie died, there was a person who said, God cannot die. And in Bob Marley's song, Jah Lives, he was talking about God not dying, that Haile Selassie did not actually die. Some of them believe that he may have died physically, but he did not die spiritually. Some of them don't believe that he died at all. Now, on to Haile Selassie and his actual beliefs. Throughout his life, he was an Ethiopian Orthodox Christian. In a 1967 interview by a Canadian viewer, they asked him about the Rastafari belief and their beliefs in reincarnating, him being the reincarnation of Jesus. He responded by saying, "I have heard of this idea. I also met certain Rastafarians. I tell them clearly, I am a man, that I am mortal, that I will be replaced by the oncoming generation, and they shall never make a mistake in assuming or pretending that a human being is emanated from deity." His grandson, Ermias Selassie, said also that there is no doubt that Haile Selassie did not encourage the Rastafari movement. So I would take it to be that they worship him in spite of what he actually said. Because he brought Ethiopia, to the forefront, and he was so charismatic, and he was so powerful in his speech amongst all of the other nations, they deified him. Now this happened in 1930 and thereafter. So think about 2,000 years ago. The same thing was happening with Esau, peace and blessings be upon him, is that because he was so powerful in his speech, they deified him. This happened 2,000 years after the time. So in current times, in modern times, it's still possible that people can worship a human being, even if they say, "I'm not God, I'm a human being." One of his most famous quotes, if you ever heard the Bob Marley song "War," it was a spoken word, and it was spoken in the Ethiopian official language, which is Amharic. I think we were talking about that Amharic language, and it's a Semitic language that's, I want to kind of find out and research the similitude between that and an Arabic language. But at any rate, in 1963, the speech was published in a book. The book was called The Important Utterances of His Majesty, the Emperor Haile Selassie. The book gives permission to freely use the contents because Haile Selassie's speech was so powerful. I believe that they wanted everyone to at least be able to hear it and get the benefit from it. Now, he gave this speech urging the United Nations officials and country representatives to disarm nuclear weapons and to end international exploitation. Here's a part of his speech, and it's pretty relevant to today. It began, that until the philosophy which holds one race superior and another inferior is finally and permanently, in which he called people out, made them come out and say, "Listen, I don't like you." You know what I mean?
I know that, I'm going to finish right here, but I know that probably here in Norfolk too, in Philadelphia, the black businesses were to me, they were peak when I was a little boy. And then after the 60s, the 70s, it's hard to find a black business. They just dwindle. Even, we used to travel down a highway. It was a route my father used to take from Richmond, Petersburg, going to Danville, but it was a black motel restaurant. And black people, you know, used to speak to each other. We had a camaraderie. It seemed like back when I was young, black people had a camaraderie that just, it was lost, you know. It seemed
Like
like
the man was talking about last week. He said, we need that do-for-self mentality, you know? And instead of asking people for a job, we create the job, you know? And then people ask us for a job. I think that's definitely needed. And it's unfortunate that we have fallen off that wagon. I don't know how that happened. You know? But it did. Is it?
Right. Ethiopia, did they have their own independence?
At that time, I believe they did with Haile Selassie. But once they got in the pocket of the Soviet Union, but then they were thrown out also. Mengistu was put in exile as well. And Robert Mugabe, he is the president, I can't remember which country now, but he had to give him asylum. I don't know why he gave him asylum, actually, because he was a person who violated all kinds of human rights. He should have been executed.
I think it's Uganda.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
So I don't know exactly what is happening there now, actually. That's
Well, they did in the early years.
yeah, the Soviet Union regime did get kicked out in 1994, I believe it was. 1991. They got kicked out.
I'm so sorry, but just one last question I gotta ask. With the wagon metaphor about us, you know, being self-independent, you know, and I tell people that now, you know, that's one thing I want to, you know, get our own business. And you know, he was around to see, you know, how well it worked, you know, but then, and which is, I think that'd be perfect. And I guess that's the question I'm asking. I think it's possible to get back on the wagon, and especially with this type of generation now, because it seems dimming, it seems dull, you know, because when I look and I try to support, you know, our businesses sometimes, man, but you know, it gets kind of hard, you know. Yeah, I'm just speaking from the heart. It gets kind of hard, and I want to, you know. So, and I, you know, press people, hey, man, let's get our own stuff or whatever, and try to get my own at least, do my share, you know. But sometimes it just seems so bleak, you know. So I guess that's the question about asking: is it possible? It looked like we kind of went backwards, because like with the affirmative action thing, if we would have had that mentality. Back then, I think that would have helped us out. Now, I think it'd be possible, you know? But it's like now, man, it just seems so kind of helpless, you know?
Are you going to respond to what he said?
Yeah, it's the psychology that they gave us. And as I came into Islam, I noticed the psychology that we had, and I was thinking, how can we get rid of that psychology that they gave us against each other? And it dawned on me that I'm reading it. It's the Quran.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
It's the Quran.
My solution to everything is Islam.
Yeah.
So I think that masses of people can only be moved by their beliefs. And the most important, the most valid belief is Islam. And that is what can gear people towards what is true and what is right, and towards empower themselves.
Yeah.
Islam is a religion that says, it's a do-for-self religion.
Yeah.
He used that quote, but that's what it is. It's do something. You can't just believe in Islam. You're not a Muslim if you're not doing something. You submit, meaning you're doing something. You're not just believing it. And I think that is what can galvanize people. When you see the highs that just went on, what other religion can get that many people to do that? You can get people to do what's righteous if you change their mindset. They don't have any belief in anything now. That's why they don't do anything.
You know, I think that's the thing with I mean, I definitely understand that, you know, Islam, yeah, that's the answer, you know, for us as Muslims. And of course, we're going to support, you know, our brothers or whatever. But like, you know, you're saying like the Christian, you know, society, and, you know, it seems like they're the majority to try to help us out and help the Christian businesses, you know.
But whenever I think of that, I also think about Al-Islam and the Quran, and it says you need some taqwa, right? You don't have to be a Muslim. If you believe in God, you have some God consciousness,
Right.
then you'll do what's right. That's why he spoke towards their morality.
Yeah.
Because you speak to a person who is sincere, a sincere Christian, a sincere Jewish person, whomever, or just a person who just believes in God, or a person who doesn't believe in God and believes in goodness. And you ask them about it, and you appeal to their consciousness, their conscience. That's how we can change this thing around. Some people don't have a conscience, so you're not going to appeal to everybody. Some people is going to fall on deaf ears, like you said, but other people that won't.